Take it away. Good morning, everybody. My name is Luann. I'm an alcoholic. I'll give you some vitals first. I'm speaking to you from Big Sky, Montana, and my home group is the Big Sky, Montana group. Today hasn't always been because I've been a geographic girl, both in my drunkenness and in my sobriety. I've been sober since September. I have to say it like this: 9/29/89. So September 29th, 1989, which is absolutely a miracle. You are looking at a miracle. And so Stephen at 25 days and Carlel at 15 years, congratulations to you both. I was told, and I have a sponsor, by the way, and I sponsor. So I think those are really important things for my recovery. And what I was told, and I hated it. And I am amazed at my restraint that I didn't throw up on the people that said it to me, is that we're going to love you until you love yourself. And that is absolutely what has happened to me in my life. I grew up in New York, in a little town called Cirrhosis by the Sea. It's Long Beach, New York, those of you that know it. And I was a blackout drink right from the get-go. Usually folks start with, I remember my first drink. I remember the first time I got drunk. Quite honestly, I don't. I don't remember a time in my life not drinking. I believe today that the family of origin that I came from, what they did was they shared their solution. And the solution in my family was drinking, anything to do to escape. And the other solution was the church. And I embraced the drinking and I rejected the church. Other than in my youth, I had this choir director that liked to get little girls drunk. And unfortunately, he liked to get little girls drunk and do things that shouldn't be done to little girls. And that firmly put me away from the church. But there were a few other things that put me away from the church. I was a kid in the church, and I would see the behavior of the folks in the church in my household, like the Holy Roller people. And then I'd see the behavior at home, and I thought, what the, what? This makes no sense to me. And so the Holy Roller in my family, I did not want what this parent had. The non-Holy Roller in my family, who was the drunk, well, they seemed more at peace. And in fact, I wanted peace because I was not at peace. And so I pursued a life of drinking and drugging. When I was 10, my dad worked for the airlines, and we could fly for free. I'm one of 8 kids. And I imagine it was a relief to get rid of one of the kids. When we were 10, we got to fly to my grandmother's for a couple of weeks by ourselves, a solo flight. And every day when I was 10 years old, my grandmother gave me my very own bottle of Asti Spumante champagne. Wasn't that beautiful? Now, my grandmother loved the hell out of me. And I don't think, actually, I know that her intention was nothing other than she wanted to share her solution. And my grandmother was a drinker. And so she shared that. And in fact, we say a lot in our rooms that family members can't, we can't get our family members sober. But I can say from my experience, not only did my family make me very thirsty, okay, my uncle got into recovery, and that's what propelled me into recovery ultimately. My uncle Billy, who some of you might know, I know Glenn knows him. He was a big drunk, and grew up on the beach. I was a lifeguard in Atlantic Beach, and after work, this is how I got myself to college. My father told me an education would set me free. I hated the hell out of my life. I hated myself. I hated you. I hated everything. And my father, the drunk, would say an education would set you free. So I thought, I'm going to get myself an education. And to get myself an education, I came from a very, very poor family. I mean, super poor. 8 kids, Roman Catholic. The church once a month got shipments of food, and then they gave us food. I was one of those kids in the cafeteria where you had, we got these green cards if you were qualified for the poor lunches. And I qualified for a green card, and I was happy about it because at least I got to eat at school. Because when the food from the church ran out, we were hungry. We had powdered milk that was so watered down, it was like water for real. I mean, it was like white in color, but it was water that we would wet our flakes with. But we weren't even allowed to drink it. We would have to pass our bowl down to the next kid so they could wet their flakes. So we were poor, we were hungry. I hated everybody. We were drunks. Funny that we always had money for drinking in our house. We always had Peel's beer. I mean, that kind of stuff. I don't even think they make it anymore. Anyway, my father said an education would set you free. So I was hell-bent that I was going to get an education. And to get my education, I became industrious. I worked. In the summers, I was on the swim team until it became hard to swim and smoke dope because, it's hard to coordinate the breathing and stuff. So I had to quit the swim team. But I was able to be a lifeguard. Right? I lifeguarded in Atlantic Beach. I would lifeguard during the day, and then I'd go to this lumberyard. I'd do their books. And then I worked at a wine and cheese place. And at the wine and cheese place, I was one of the worst waitresses you could ever meet in your life. But the owner of the wine and cheese place would give us free booze and drugs. And he liked little girls, and I was a little girl. and after work, we would go out on his boat and do things on a boat that little girls shouldn't be doing. And then he would take the boat across on the beach in Atlantic Beach, and I would swim to the shore. I don't even know how I made the shore some days. And then I would lifeguard, and I didn't put this scarf on for this reason. And I would lifeguard, and I'd wrap the towel around my neck so tightly, put these dark glasses on, so when I fell asleep, my head wouldn't tilt over. So I would lifeguard unconscious. Not a good way to lifeguard. So, if there was an amends to make on a beach, that would be my job, certainly. So anyway, that's how I got myself to college. I was a blackout drunk. And by the way, from the beach, from lifeguarding during the day, it's pretty hard to be hungover, wrapping your neck so that your head doesn't tilt while you're sleeping, working off a hangover. So then I'd have to go do the books. So my uncle's house was on the way from the beach to the lumberyard. I would stop at my uncle's house because he always had, in addition to booze, other drugs that would perk you up. And so I get my little hit at my uncle's house, and off I'd go to the books and repeat the cycle. And somehow I managed to get to college and excelled in college. I structured my classes so that I could drink. If I had to have a class on Friday morning, that was a problem. And I became a work hard, play hard girl. And what I also became, I was launched into college as work hard, play hard, right? And to be self-sufficient. I wasn't going to depend on anybody, nobody. It was all going to be about me, right? So now I'm at college, and I had a lot of success. I got a great job out of college, blacked out through college. But what happened when I was in college, it was my senior year, my uncle had his bottom, and he ended up in a rehab, a drug and alcohol rehab. And the only one in the family that he would see while he was in that rehab was me. So I left college and drove to see him. And I had a very tight bond with my uncle, a beautiful bond, both in alcoholism and drug addiction and in sobriety. And he was sober, and that made all the difference. I'm like, oh my God, Uncle Billy, you're sober and you seem happier. How is that possible, right? And I got to watch my uncle basically be resurrected from the dead. And, we were alike. He would wake up in the morning and he would have to do some drugs to perk himself up. And then he would drink all throughout the day. And now he was living and he wasn't doing that. I'm like, how is he doing that? And he seems to be okay with it. Well, he suggested that I go to AA, and I'm like, Uncle Billy, I'm not as bad as you are, right? I don't need to go to AA. And he said, well, I'll be your qualifier. You can go to Al-Anon. I'm like, you're the only alcoholic I know. Ha, ha, ha. Right? Like, I'm surprised he didn't laugh in my face. I come from a family riddled with alcoholism. I just didn't know what alcoholism was. And I would call him up crying. Glenn knows I'm a crier because I've called Glenn crying too. Sandy knows it. I've cried to her. Mary Jane knows it. I've cried to her. Karen knows it. I'm a crier. I just cry. Right? Well, poor Uncle Billy, I would call him all the time, whining and moaning and crying about how much pain I was in. Right? And eventually, he would just say the same thing to me over and over again. Luann, go to Al-Anon, go to Al-Anon, go to Al-Anon. I go to Al-Anon and I say, my Uncle Billy's my qualifier. And then he starts pestering me. And I related to the Al-Anon people because surprisingly, he's not the only alcoholic in my family and not the only alcoholic I know. And I'll just say, I'm one of 8 kids. I'm the oldest girl. My older brother got airlifted out of our house at 13, just disappeared one day. He was sent to live with my grandmother. Like, okay, that's a little bit weird. And then there were 7 of us in the house. And then I had another brother die. Then there were 6 of us left in the house. And of those 6 that were left there, 5 of us were at a Thanksgiving dinner once, and they were all talking about being in jail. And I'm like, wait a second, I've never been to jail. Hey, wait a second, I've never got a DUI, right? This is just my siblings. Yet I'm the only one who's in AA. It's pretty amazing. Okay. And I didn't know any alcoholics. So I go into Al-Anon, I belong there, and my uncle starts harassing me only out of love. You know, there are certain people in my life that I give spiritual consent to, and I call that the people that can call me on my stuff. And my uncle was one of those people. And he would say, Luann, you have to get a sponsor. You have to get a sponsor, get a sponsor, get a sponsor, get a sponsor. And I'm like, for the love of God, would you just leave me go? Let me be. And he said, no, Lou, I love you. I love you. And you need to get a sponsor. Your life is unmanageable and you need a manager. And it can't be me. And so to shut him up for, honestly, I swear to God, for no other reason, I'm like, fine, I'll get a sponsor. Now, at this point, I did a geographic from New York. I was working, I got a gigantic job at a college. I was working for New York Hospital for Special Surgery on the Upper East Side. And New York was the problem because, you know, to black out in New York is a scary thing as a young woman. You know, to wake up on a park bench and have no idea where you are, or to wake up between the sheets with somebody and have no idea who the hell they are, you know, that's a problem. So I figured New York was the problem. I went to Portland, Oregon. And when I got to Portland, Oregon, they had a different kind of Al-Anon meeting that I landed my little butt in. And they called it like Al-Anon for adult children or something like this. And there was this woman in this meeting who was comfortable in her own skin. And she didn't seem to care about what anybody thought about her. And the other thing about this woman is when she smiled, her gum show. And not only did her gum show, she had a space between her teeth. Now, before I had a diving accident, I used to have a space between my teeth. And my mother, who was very concerned with me looking good, used to try to train me to smile and not have my gum show. This is this is where I came from, right? Now, Jackie, she smiled and her gum showed, and she didn't care what anybody thought about her. And I thought, well, I'm going to ask that lady to be my sponsor. So I asked her, I said, Jackie, would you be my sponsor? And she said, I just got my boob chopped off. I'm on a walker. I'm dying with cancer. And you want what I have? And I said, the tears rolling down my face, yes, I want what you have. Right. And she goes, which program? And I said, which program? Are you joking me? Al-Anon, of course. And she goes, we'll see. Right. So Jackie, because she did have cancer, she said, listen, I don't have any time for any bullshit, little girl. I was 22 at the time. She said, I don't have any time for any crap. Although she used more colorful words than those. So sorry, this is recorded. I forgot, Glenn. I don't think we're supposed to curse on a recording. Sorry. She told me, it doesn't say this in the big book. I didn't even know what the big book was. And I'm like, doesn't bother me. I'm just supposed to do what you tell me to do. I'm told by my uncle. She said, I want you to write down 5 things that you'd rather die than tell anybody, because you need to do a searching and fearless moral inventory, and this is going to make it fearless. So I write down the 5 things, not right away, by the way, not right away. So the other thing she told me to do is I had to get on my knees every day in the morning and say, please, and every day at night and say, thank you. And I said, what am I going to do that for? She said, because you have to pray, because you need help. And I said, pray to what? I don't believe in God. And in fact, I don't want anything to do with God. And if this program has something to do with God, I'm out. Now, she didn't say to me, you know, little girl, what you're trying to do is swim in the ocean and not get wet, right? She said, little girl, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter where you came from. You will find a power greater than yourself that will help you see the truth about your life, because you're lost right now. And you need to form a relationship with this power. And to do that, you have to start communicating with this power. And that's you on your knees saying, please, in the morning. And that's you at night on your knees saying, thank you. And I said, well, Jackie, I don't believe in anything, right? She said, that's clear by the results of your life, right? And so I'm like, okay, F you, I'm going to pray to that doorknob over there. And she said, if that's where you got to start, great. Now, so I start doing that, and she tells me I have to call her every day, right? Because why? I needed to start developing a relationship with her. And you don't develop a relationship with somebody you don't spend any time with. But I wasn't allowed to call her until I got on my knee first, or knees. So I'd call her up and she'd say, did you get on your knees and say, please? And I'd say, no. Click. She would hang up on me, right? I'm like, what the hell? Anyway, I get in enough pain, because life gives us enough pain when we're as defiant and resistant as I am. And so I start getting on my knees and praying in the morning, please, and praying at night, thank you. And I call her, and did you write the 5 things? Nope. Click. She really didn't want to waste her time with me, right? So finally, I write the 5 things that I'd rather die than tell anybody. I share them with her. And we went to a restaurant, and we order food. She loved to eat. And I couldn't eat because I had this very tight knot in my throat and I couldn't swallow. And she said, why aren't you eating? This food's delicious. I said, I got a knot in my throat. She said, why do you have a knot in your throat? I said, I'm trying to hold back my tears. She goes, oh my God, your ego is gigantic, right? She would be so proud of me now, because I can cry anywhere, anytime, because she did pass. And anyway, I share the 5 things that I'd rather die than tell anybody. And she said, I think you might want to try AA. Now, I don't remember what those 5 things were, but I'm sure like 4 of the 5 had to do with me being a drunk and doing something ridiculous. And so with enough pain, not because I was happy to go to AA, I thought I could just stay sober with the little Al-Anons, right? It didn't work. I couldn't identify with the Al-Anons. They didn't drink like I drank. In fact, there's this one Al-Anon girl. We went to this nude beach in Oregon, right? And I'm sharing my story, and she's looking at me like I have 12 heads. And I go, what's the matter? And she goes, man, I don't even know what a blackout is. And then she had never drank like I did. I mean, the identification in AA is so vital, because unless I know that you've been where I've been, I'm not going to employ what you've employed to seek my solution, right? So I found identification in AA. I found people who lied to themselves about the drinking the way I did. This time I can handle it, right? I'm different. This was me. I'm smarter than you all. I can figure out how to drink to just that level, right? Where I'm comfortable. But I couldn't. I would always pass that line, and unpredictably. And I know that some of you can probably relate to that. So I landed my little butt in AA. She had me do 90 meetings for 90 days because I needed to see what an alcoholic was, because I didn't know. I did those 90 meetings in 90 days, and I will never forget. She had me go to a different meeting every day for 2 weeks. And she said, AA is like Baskin and Robbins. There are different flavors of ice cream in a Baskin Robbins. Find the flavor that works for you, right? Well, I found the sickest of the sick meetings, because that's where I was. That's what worked for me at that time. And every meeting I went to for the first 2 weeks, there was this old lady, and she was like a haunt. And she would say, nobody gets here by mistake. And it felt to me like she was glaring at me. And I'd be in my head, I'd be like, F you old broad, right? She was at every meeting I went to. And I went to a different meeting every day for 2 weeks, because I learned Jackie wouldn't have anything to do with me if I didn't do what she told me. And for some reason, I wanted what she had. And what she had was love. Jackie had love in her heart, and she loved me. And before Jackie died, the night before she died, actually, she called me up, and Jackie was a lesbian, and she didn't have any kids. And she said, Luann, I've always wanted a daughter, and God gave me you. And I was with Jackie for 3 years before she died in AA, and some time before that. And she said, I love you, and I'm so grateful God put you in my life, and I'm going to miss you, but I'll always be with you, because love never dies. And so when I think about the people who told me, we're going to love you until you love yourself, Jackie was one of the first people. God has put many people in my life that have loved me into wholeness. So Jackie died, and I mistakenly thought, Jackie got me sober. Jackie didn't get me sober. God got me sober. And what Jackie did was what every good sponsor will do, is they'll take your hand, right? Develop a relationship with you until they can put your hand in God's hand, right? Because there's not a sponsor on the planet who is God. And my sponsor today, I've had the same sponsor. I was afraid to be without a sponsor. And I'm glad for that. That's a healthy fear for me. Healthy fears bring healthy actions. And so I started only because of my Uncle Billy. I was 3 years sober, and he was a pain in the butt. He kept telling me to go to these big book seminars, right? Or maybe I was 2 years sober. He kept telling me to go to these big book seminars. And it was Joe and Charlie. And I'm like, listen, I don't read the big book, right? You don't need to read the big book to get sober. This is me telling Uncle Billy. And by the way, Uncle Billy, you don't spell God B-I-L-L. It's spelled G-O-D, right? And we can have any God we want in this program, right? So you can keep your God to yourself, and you can keep your big book to yourself. And by the way, you can go to meetings where they don't say God and they don't talk about the book. Found them. Now, I wasn't very happy in my sobriety at that time. And I was supposed to get married this one weekend. I decided to cancel the wedding, and I was looking to hide. And Uncle Billy had asked me for a while to go to one of these studies. And so where better to hide than at a study? Now, it wasn't a big book study. It was a 12 and 12. And it was Willie B., and it was Clancy, and it was John Williams. And they took us through the 12 steps in the 12 and 12. And it was the first time I was exposed to our literature. And I thought, ooh, I'm a book girl. One of the ways I did geographics as a kid was I would escape into books, anything to take me out of myself. And here were people who were reading a book, right? And it was the 12 and 12. And it was like arrows to my heart. It was like spiritual arrows to my heart. And that opened me up to go into my first big book study. And going to my first big book study, that's where I met Glenn over 30 years ago. I felt love. And not only that, there were these, I don't want to say simple guys, but simple. Charlie used to wear these little suspenders, and he had those thick glasses. He was so darn cute. And our first Joe, when he smiled, it lit up the room. It just lit up the room. And these guys were peaceful, and they loved our program, and they were able to communicate it in a simple way so I could hear it. And when they explained what it was to be an alcoholic, that I have an allergy, an abnormal reaction, that once I put any booze whatsoever into my system, I have no control over how much I'm going to take. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's me. And the mental obsession, the lie I tell myself and believe, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's me. They're making this so simple. And so now all I have to do is have a psychic change. And here's how you have the psychic change. You work these steps. Really? That's it? And the directions are in the book. Okay, I'm going to read that stinking book. And let me tell you, this book, divinely inspired, no doubt, it is a living, breathing document. And every single time I read it, I learn something new. And what I'm learning today, and by the way, my sponsor, I got my latest sponsor. She's been my sponsor for like 28 years. She's doing a great job. So I think I'll keep her. She's a book girl, and she always directs me to the solution in the book. Well, what's the solution in the book? Sorry, if you're an anti-God girl like I was, it's God. The solution is God. May you find him now, right? That's what our book tells us. So I go to these big book studies, and I become a student of the big book. And Glenn knows, I'm like, there's truth in here that when I apply it to my life goes better, right? And what I'm learning these days in the book is that it's all about a relationship with God. It's all about a relationship. It says in our little book, see to it your relationship with him is right. Well, how do I see to it that my relationship with him is right? Well, I've got to seek him. That's my job. Now, Jackie, my first sponsor, she told me, little girl, God's not lost, you are. You have to seek God. She took me to Buddhist monasteries, right? She took me to Indian drumming circles, where the Indian shaman, you bang on the drums and do this kind of thing. And I was christened Little Al, right? I went to this Hawaiian shaman lady and she gave me something with that. I mean, I was seeking, man, I was a seeker. Now, the only place I wouldn't seek was the religion of my childhood. Joe and Charlie die, and the next generation, Pat and Brian, come up, and they are now speaking from the podium. And this is me being a complete jerk, egomaniac. Pat does his first talk from the podium, and he says, go back to the religion of your childhood and find an adult reason to leave it. And I'm like, hell no. I go up to him, I put my arm around him, and I say, Pat, you did a great job up there. I've been coming to these studies for a long time. Sober longer than you are. Listen to what a jerk I am, right? You don't need to be saying that from the podium. In fact, Joe and Charlie never said that from the podium. And he's like, okay, nice to meet you. Shoves me off. The next year I go back, he says it again. I go up to him again, thank the speaker. I have, Pat, last year I suggested that you not share that, go back to the religion of your childhood and find an adult reason to leave it from the podium. I suggested to that. Okay, I threw up in my mouth when I said that to you. I said, if you say it again, I'm going to throw up on the table, right? I go back the next year, he says it again, right? Now, I'm telling you, I wanted to choke the hell out of this guy. I had a vision of putting my hands around his neck and his eyeballs popping out. I have a reaction that's so over the top. It's something that should be looked at. When I'm reacting to something in that way, I'm resisting pretty heavily. And in fact, there was, it's up on the screen right now. If you look on the little Zoom thing, it's I don't know who it is. Carol L has this thing over her name. It says, what if the change you're avoiding is the one that gives you wings, right? And the change I initially avoided was I love to drink. I love to drink. I love to drink for oblivion. It took me out of myself. And I avoided AA, and it has given me wings. And now in AA, I keep getting wings, right? And the change I was avoiding so violently was going back to the religion of my childhood and finding an adult reason to leave it. Well, I left that big book seminar, and only God can work in this way. And it was my brother Richie's 50th surprise birthday in Florida, and the big book seminar was in Florida. And I go from the seminar to my brother's birthday, and who's there but the nun who took me through all of my sacraments as a kid, my first grade teacher. Her name is Sister Phyllis, and I would call her Syphilis. And I'm seeing her as an adult. And I said, not Syphilis, I said, Sister Phyllis. I said, what the hell did you teach me as a child? Because I'm lost. I can't figure out this God thing. And by the way, thank you for praying for me. Now, Sister Phyllis, when I was a kid, I was a public drunk, and I embarrassed my family like some of us do. And she would go on retreats and she would pray for me she would go on silent retreats, and she would write me a letter about how she's praying for me, praying every year. She'd go on, I get this letter, until she lost my address, and she prayed for me. So I actually said to her, I said, Sister Phyllis, thanks for praying for me. I'm sober, 25 years in AA right now. I said, and I'm hitting a wall here. I'm really hitting the wall, and I'm struggling with God. And you're the one, primary who taught me about God. And she said to me, she said, Lou, we made a mistake with your generation. We taught you about rules. We didn't teach you about relationship. And it's about a relationship with God. Right? So I suggest forget everything that you've learned, right? And when in our program, we talk about we need to have an open mind. And it's an open mind to let the stuff out that blocks me from having a new experience as an adult who's not, polluted with booze and everything else I put into my system. So she suggested I start reading the Bible, which our first Joe called the big, big book. I thought he meant like for old people, a really big, large print version. And he too would say, our job is to seek, and we've got to put God first. right? So anyway, I start reading the Bible, which I never thought I would do. And because I was taught in this program to be a seeker, the Bible didn't make any sense to me. It was like reading Chinese, much like the big book. I needed a guide to go through the big book. I needed a guide. So this is me, impulsive still, even in my sobriety. I thought, well, this stuff makes no sense to me. I'm just going to fly over to Jerusalem where all the action happened. Right? And maybe it'll make sense to me then. And so I end up on this tour, and it was a random thing. I got this email blast, and it said pilgrimage to Israel. I'm like, the people who go on these pilgrimages, like people who go to big book seminars, they probably understand, like people that go to big book seminars, they get the program as outlined in the book. Maybe the people who go on these pilgrimages have a clue about what's in the Bible. Well, my very first, and by the way, I had a terrible car accident, broke my pelvis. And so I show up on this pilgrimage and I can't move very much, which is a good thing because I would have left it as soon as I got there. Right? But I get there and I'm barely mobile. But the lady on the pilgrimage thing, when I went to cancel it, right, because I'm always looking for an out, I was like, listen, I broke my pelvis. I don't think I can come on the pilgrimage anymore. And she said, don't worry. We have people on wheelchairs. You'll be fine. It's handicap accessible. So I'm like, all right, I'll come. Right? So I hang out with that group of people who can't move, which I'm a mover. I'm a geographic girl, and now I can't move. And I show up, and the very first day on the bus, these two women behind me, and I had to take up more than one seat because I couldn't sit up straight. They lean over and they go, hi, would you like to do the rosary with us? And I say, no, not today, thanks. Right? And in my head, I'm like, oh my God, how did I get here? This is going to be hell. Right? So anyway, I stick through on this pilgrimage and I show up there much like I showed up with AA. My arms are crossed, right? And I'm like, if I could throw up on you, I'll throw up on you. And this one guy on the pilgrimage, he goes, Luann, you don't seem like the rest of the folks on this pilgrimage. I said, is it because I can't move very well and I'm young as opposed to all the old people that can't move? He goes, no, you have a little bit of a different attitude. I said, really? I said, you really want to know why I'm here? And he said, I asked you, didn't I? And I said, I'm here to go back to the religion of my childhood and find an adult reason to leave it. And he looked at me and he goes, oh, right. Now, he watched me during the course of this thing. And what I did not know is that I was ending up on a pilgrimage with a pretty famous Bible scholar. It would be like the Joe and Charlie of today. And I asked this guy, I'm like, I go and I listen to lectures every day. I'm like, who is this guy? And he tells me who he is. I'm like, well, so what does that mean? Why are people asking him for his autograph? And he tells me I'm like, that means nothing to me. Well, this guy was actually a Bible authority, and he has become a really good friend of mine. And when I have questions, right, I call him up. And I don't know how he has the patience. I swear I don't know how he has the patience for me. He reminds me of my first sponsor, and like, whew, pray and then call me again. Do this and then call me again. And I've learned that I need to listen. So what happened on that pilgrimage, and, I had a lot of spiritual awakenings over the course of my sobriety, or I don't believe I would have stayed sober as long as I did. And I know a spiritual awakening is that I've had a personality change sufficient to recover from alcoholism. I don't have to do what I did ever again. I don't. And it's not because of me and my great works, right? Which is what I thought. I thought, if I work these steps, then I will be sober, right? And that's true. But why is it true? It's true because what my friend Tom says. He said the steps are a GPS system. They're a God positioning system. They put me in a position for that divine lightning strike, for grace, right? For God's grace to get me sober, which is a free gift. It's given to me freely. And so I do these steps, and God's grace enters my life, and I can stay sober, whether I realize it or not, right? So I'm in Israel, defiant and resistance, and I'm going to make peace with this once and for all. And that same guy who asked me what I was doing there, he came to me towards the end of our pilgrimage thing, and he said, Luann, it came to me that I'm supposed to give you a ticket to go to the Chapel of the Holy Sepulchre. And I said, what's the Chapel of the Holy Sepulchre? He said, it's the holiest place on the planet, for Christians. And the Muslim people have things there, surrounding this area. He said, this is like the highlight of the trip. And he goes like, oh, yeah, right. You have no idea what you're doing. I said, is this something I should say yes to? Because what Jackie taught me in AA was never to say no to a reasonable AA request. And so when I went to this pilgrimage, I was going to say yes to a reasonable request. So I say to him, is this a reasonable request? He goes, yes. I said, what are we going to do in this chapel overnight? I said, are you going to give me sleeping bags? What are we doing? And he's like, oh, he goes, Luann, we're going to pray. I said, we're going to pray all night. I said, I've only prayed all night when I was thrown up over the toilet. I don't know if I can pray all night. And by the way, I don't know that many prayers. I know, all the prayers in the big book, but that's about it, right? I'm falling short after that. And so he was so patient with me, right? So patient. Well, listen to what happens. I show up to go to the Chapel of the Holy Sepulchre all night, going to pray all night. And I have a little prayer journal. And he told me I should make out a schedule. So I'm like, all right, I'll make out the schedule. And I meet him in the lobby. And he has given the other 3, there were 4 of us that were able to go into the chapel. By the way, 16 people in the entire country got a ticket to spend the night in this place. And I get one of them. And then I found out it's a really big deal. And I say, you should give this ticket to one of these people who really appreciate it. I don't belong here. He said, yeah, I kind of feel that way too, but no, you're supposed to go. And so I go, and there are 3 men. I'm like, oh, yeah, right. 3 men and me in a church. Yeah, sure. Right. I'm like, really, God, is this what you want me to do? And it's exactly what God wanted me to do. So I go to the Chapel of the Holy Sepulchre, and it's like I have the golden ticket. And to me, that's what AA has been. It's the golden ticket, with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I have this golden ticket, and it's an international crowd outside this chapel, and everybody's wanting in, and I get to go in. Right. And I don't even want to. Doesn't that sound like AA? Right. And all I have to do is be willing. And I have to seek. And God's going to reveal himself to me. Now, not everybody needs to fly over to Israel and hang out with 3 men and pray all night. But that's what needed to happen for me. I have been violated by men throughout my life. And it was God's grace that put me with these 3 beautiful men. And so the one guy's name was Jeff, and he's going to pray us into this night like a football huddle. He's like this big, gigantic guy. And he goes, we're going to pray ourselves in. And we get in this huddle. So he says a prayer, and then Joe says a prayer, and then Tony says a prayer. And they look at me and I say, I'm good. Right. And then Jeff said, well, I'm going to stay and be first online for Mass. I said, as soon as they open those doors, I'm out of here. Right. So he says, let's meet up at 1 o'clock in the morning, because this is 7 o'clock at night, and they're not opening the doors till the next morning. We're locked in, the 16 of us that are the lucky ticket holders. And we're going to check on each other. So I say, great. I go about my first couple of hours. My pelvis is hurting me, and I'm going to meet them at 1 o'clock. And I decide to lay down in the corner of the church on the floor because it's marble and it's freezing cold. And I thought maybe the cold would help my hips. Well, what happens? I fall asleep, drooling asleep, snoring, drooling, and asleep. And so these guys, on the most important night of their lives, the one they've been looking forward to, because these were men of faith, they look for me at 1 o'clock and they can't find me, right? And so they waste their precious minutes combing this gigantic multi-roomed chapel. And there were different buses, and I didn't know Joe and Tony. I only knew Jeff. And they're looking for me, wasting their minutes, right? And they decide to do this thorough search. Now, I was laying off in the corner on the floor, asleep, right? And Joe, who didn't know me, said, I saw one person snoring in the corner, right? But it can't be Luann. She's wearing an orange coat, and she was wearing a white coat when she came in here. And Jeff said, oh, she's got an orange raincoat. So these 3 men come to me as I'm snoring in the corner, and literally a puddle of drool. And they said, we found you. We found you. And they were so happy to find me, right? And they said, I think we should stay together, right? And because I'm embarrassed and I feel guilty, I say, okay. Now, the three of them start praying out loud, right? Underneath this place where Jesus's cross was, and you can put your hand in where the cross was, there's this little room. And these three men pray, and they open their hearts in a way that I have never heard a man open their heart other than some beautiful men in AA, but this was a little bit different. And they share like their guts, and it was beautiful. And they were crying and sharing this stuff. And then they looked at me and they're like, well, and I'm like, am I really supposed to share with you guys? And they said, yeah. And so I opened up my guts to them. And then we all prayed together. And I've had many spiritual experiences, spiritual awakenings in my life. But I had a spiritual experience then, and I felt God for the first time. And what I know is true. I know it's true for me, and I know it's true for you. God loves me, and he wants a relationship with me. I'm a mom. I have 3 beautiful kids, and they ask me, Mom, why did God make us? And I said, because he has a sense of humor, right? No, I mean, that's true too. I believe God has a sense of humor, but God made me because he wants a relationship with me and he loves me, right? And what I know is true is I put things between me and God. I put a lot of things between me and God. I put booze, I put drugs, I put men, I put, you name it, shopping, food. I put so many things between me and God. And our steps give me a way to reduce those things with God's help. Think about it. First step, I can't do it. Second step, he can do it. Third step, I think I'm going to let him. Fourth step, I'm going to write down all my resentments. Oh, they block me from God. I'm going to write down all my fears. They block me from God. I'm going to write down all the things I have guilt and shame about. They block me from God. And I'm going to put them in the light with a trusted sponsor. I've actually done it. I've gone to a sponsor and I've gone to a priest. I think they're both fabulous, right? And light is a disinfectant. Light heals, right? And the more I get free of this stuff that's blocking me from God, the more I feel God, right? What a beautiful gift I was given in this program. And I keep being given more and more gifts. And now today, I see God all over. I'm looking at Glenn, and Glenn has this thing he has his guys do, keeping a little notebook. Is it odd or is it God? And if I had a notebook, it would be so ridiculous. I'd need 50 notebooks, more than that. I see God everywhere. And all those little odd things that happen, they're not odd. They're God trying to reach me. Why? Because he loves me. God loves me. God loves you. And he wants a relationship with me. And he wants a relationship with you. How do I get that relationship? I have to spend time with him. I have to seek him. And our 12 and 12 is so cool. I read this stuff and I'm like, has that line always been in there? In chapter 6, Father Ed Dowling, the clergyman, right, said, the step that separates the men from the boys, which when I first came in as a young woman was like, now I'm mature. I'm like, yeah, what separates the men from the boys? It's those who are trying to grow in the image and likeness of their creator. Well, I can't grow into my creator if I don't know who the heck he is, right? And how do I know who anybody is? Got to spend time with them. Got to get rid of the stuff that gets in between me and God. So my life today, I used to hate God. I love God. Glenn does. I've got God right here. I've got God right here on my best days, And when I can show love, God is present in me. When I have joy, and I have joy a lot, joy is the infallible sign of the presence of God, right? Lest you think my life, floating. I am so not. One of my sisters just left the psych ward last Monday. And, I was a rotten sister to my siblings. Like I said, I was the oldest girl. My brother got airlifted. And when I was a kid, when I was in high school, I used to take I got in a lot of trouble when I drank in school. So then I had to go to chemicals, right? And I would take Quaaludes at lunchtime so that when I got home, I could be like this to help raise my siblings because my parents were AWOL. And I was abusive to my siblings. And my sister Marion, who was I shouldn't have said her name. Anyway, she was in the psych ward. She's been in and out of prison. She's been in and out of the psych ward. And she just got out again this past Monday. And I spoke to her. Glenn, you met her years ago at a study, by the way. And I said, Marion, is there anything I can do for you? And she has so much hatred for me. She said, you abused me my whole life. And I said, well, I know I abused you when you were little, honey. And I know that you're full of hatred and bitterness for me. I said, is there anything I can do to help you get rid of that? Because it's killing you. It's killing you. Right? And she wasn't able to come up with a way for me to do that. But I stand ready. I absolutely stand ready because I have hurt people in the past. And what's so beautiful, God's so cool. They keep getting floated into my life. I had this guy floated into my life like a month ago who I was in college with. And apparently I was at a kegger or something like this. And I went and I sat down next to him and I made out with him and I got up and I left. And then I saw him in lab the next Monday and I pretended like it didn't happen. And here he is 40 years later. He's like, Luann, I've always, wondered, did I do something wrong? I'm like, well, no, I have no recollection that I even did that. So sorry. Can I explain to you what a blackout is? Right. So I said, that must have been very confusing for you. He goes, yeah, this beautiful little blonde comes and kisses me and I'm like psyched. And then the next day she pretends like she doesn't know me. I'm like, yeah. And so I validate his experience. That must have been confusing. And that must have hurt you. And you didn't deserve that. You didn't deserve that. It was wrong of me to do that. I wish I could take it back and I can't. Can I make you feel better about it now? So this program has given me gift after gift after gift. I love it. And I love so many of you on this program that I know, on the Zoom, and those that I don't know. I would like to help you experience love so that you can heal in the same way that I did. And that's it for me. Thank you. I'll pass.